Welcome to Free Media. I'm Robby Soave.
And I'm Amber Duke.
Well, Secretary of State Marco Rubio announced on Monday on X that foreign students expressing support for Hamas will have their visas and green cards revoked. This comes as news of federal immigration authorities detaining Mahmoud Khalil, a Columbia University protester and graduate student. Khalil is a green card holder originally from a refugee camp in Syria. He is of Palestinian heritage but holds Algerian citizenship.
A Department of Homeland Security spokesperson claims he, quote, led activities aligned to Hamas, Trump declared. This is the first arrest of many to come. This has caused a fierce debate about possible violations to free speech.
Resident alien, he can be deported under U.S. law for if the Secretary of State has any reasonable ground to believe he would have a potentially serious adverse foreign policy consequence. And you mentioned the student organization. The student organization put out. Let me finish.
But before you move on, because I think that's a really important point, right? That's the statute that they're using.
Yeah.
Have you seen any evidence to suggest that there is actually a serious reason to believe that this student is going to be a threat to to national security?
I've certainly watched the abomination that's gone on at Columbia and Barnard and other places, and I will just tell you,
threat to national security.
And I'll just tell you that
I'm not going to let you move on because this is.
I'll tell you why it's a threat to national security if you let me answer you.
Well, Scott,
do you want me to answer you or not?
Okay.
His organization says we are dedicated, fighting for the total eradication of Western civilization.
Okay.
But even some on the right are not convinced. Ann Coulter, of all people, wrote on X about the general idea of compiling a list of, quote, pro-Hamas foreign students. She said, there's almost no one I don't want to deport, but unless they've committed a crime, isn't this a violation of the First Amendment? I rarely disagree with Scott Jennings these days, and I don't know specifically exactly what this individual's views are. I probably find them totally reprehensible, but I am not at all set at ease by the kind of rationale that has been come up with so far for why they're doing this. He's a green card holder. Those should be subject to like a higher level of protection. Maybe he doesn't have exactly First Amendment rights. Maybe that doesn't apply here, but still the language they use that it's not just like it's aligning with Hamas and encouraging anti-Semitism, I think that starts to get pretty subjective. Like the terrorism statute is providing material aid and support. That's a little bit more tangible. If they have evidence he's really like in contact with Hamas or something, okay, please show it. What they've said so far doesn't at all reassure me that this isn't just a free speech issue.
Yeah, it's a pretty thorny issue. I was looking into the statute, and there is a part of it outside of permanent residence for people on student visas, which I believe the Trump administration originally thought he was on because he only recently got the green card through marriage, I believe.
Right, he's married, his wife is a citizen, his wife's pregnant.
And it says in that providing material support to terrorists can mean actually even just propagandizing on behalf of terrorists. So if his group is, for example, passing out materials that has the Hamas logo on it, which I've seen reporting of online, then that would constitute a violation of that statute. And you're right that people who are here on either temporary visas or even permanent status don't enjoy the same free speech protections that American citizens do. They do have to abide by a certain set of standards, particularly when it relates to this terrorism clause of what they are and are not allowed to say.
Yeah.
You can't be outright anti-American, or I think you shouldn't be outright anti-American and be granted that in the first place. But once they get it, as a green card holder, he has a higher standard of due process than a student visa holder has. But that due process doesn't mean that they have to prove that he committed a crime, just that if he decides to appeal this decision or challenge it in court, they have to demonstrate that he actually did the things that violate this terrorism statute.
Well, look, there's no doubt in my mind that certain students and certain student organizations have gone beyond just support for the Palestinian cause and have expressed, a solidarity or a support for what Hamas is doing. But even that is a little different than saying that they are like linked to Hamas to the level that then I would be comfortable saying, okay, yeah, maybe you don't belong here. Maybe there's some action that should be taken. The kind of just like aligns with Hamas rhetoric, frankly, actually strikes me as that's Putin propaganda. You're saying something Russia agrees with. Well, and it's not even anti-American rhetoric, right? It's anti-Israel rhetoric.
Right.
It's a different country.
Right.
That's not our country.
That's
I
true.
broadly think we should bring in people, who are supportive of, American values, fine. But this is a foreign policy question, and there are legitimate, I think, grievances with the way Israel has conducted this war effort. It's certainly not anti-American to say we should spend American tax dollars at home rather than in support of what this foreign government is doing. So I am very, and he's not one of the. No one has said so far. Maybe again, prove if I'm wrong. Show me the evidence to the contrary. That he was even specifically occupying a public building he was like negotiating on their behalf.
Right, so I think he was involved in the encampment, which was illegal.
But again, involved in the encampment
he
starts
was there.
to be...
I mean, he was there. He was their lead negotiator with the university, so there's videos of him like in the encampment. And then someone else claimed that he was in one of the occupied buildings, but that's unverified because I haven't been able to verify it, so I don't want to say for sure based on what someone else is saying on the internet. But I do think that if he was actually violating law in that way, that's a more compelling reason for revoking the green card than being engaged in speech that the administration doesn't approve of, particularly because on this issue, there's a pretty big split among young Americans in particular and the university populace on what the right posture is on the Israel-Palestine question. And so then you get into this debate over, okay, so the green card holder's not allowed to be running this group on Columbia's campus, but American citizens can do it no problem. Like, what's the tangible difference? But I actually think the stronger move that the Trump administration made that is less, I think, debatable is pulling the federal grant funding from Columbia
Well, we
University.
discussed this on Rising, and Niall was objecting to it, and I'm like, well, I don't really think they should lose the funding specifically for this reason. I just think they should lose the funding.
Exactly.
I would just strip funding from like why should public dollars flow to elite educational institutions that are themselves rich? Does not make a lot of sense to me.
But I think it's more compelling in that case because Columbia helped foment the scenario where students were engaging in illegal activity on campus, impeding on the rights of students to access classes and services and public property, and not shutting down the encampments. And so in that sense, I think it's actually more reasonable for the administration to say, you aided and abetted students in engaging in illegal activity, that's why we're taking the federal money away.
I want to go back just for a second before we let this go to the exact language they use, which just does rub me the wrong way in terms of supporting anti-Semitism and supporting something that is contrary to national security interests. That seems such a subjective determination based on who is at this moment in the White House or who's like there is tremendous disagreement on what our foreign policy should be, even within the Republican Party, with respect to Ukraine. To some extent, with respect to Israel even. And so to say this isn't, what does that mean? This doesn't align with what Marco Rubio is thinking right now? I mean, Marco Rubio and Elon Musk have some differences. We're probably going to talk about that later in the show. I think that's fine and healthy. And then anti-Semitism, again, there is plenty of it on college campuses, absolutely. I think the statement that National Students for Justice in Palestine put out in response to the October 7th terrorist attack was abominable, was atrocious. But also anti-Semitism has been an excuse to urge more censorship on social media with organizations like the ADL, which I've agreed with more recently, but a year or two ago was calling on advertisers to stop working with X based on what actually turned out to be very fraudulently represented information about how much hate was rising or spiking on the platforms. These are all tools to convince people to get on board censorship in cases that seem really sympathetic, and that, that's a slippery slope. And I can actually see it in work here. So I'm very concerned here.
Yeah, there's a lot of conflation of anti-Semitism with just pro-Palestinian language, and those aren't always the same thing. Sometimes they are, but not always. And to your point, if you have a Democratic administration who decides that they're going to start stripping green cards from people who are being racist towards minorities, and it's people who are just expressing views about immigration, for example, and wanting tighter border security, does that constitute a violation of the national security clause or not engaging in hateful speech? I think it is a sort of...
our own government pushed Israel and Hamas to negotiate a ceasefire, right? It was our national security policy that we should have peace in that region. So it just starts. It gets weird.
It's very thorny.
There needs to be space for debate on this issue.
Yeah, they need to be careful because this is obviously very thorny, both legally and when it comes to culturally how we approach free speech.
Indeed. All right, thanks for watching. We've got more Free Media episodes coming out. Stay tuned for more content that'll be released in just a bit. See you later.